So I was prepping for this episode, and sometimes I watch some of my favorite speakers on YouTube. Maybe it's like a compilation, and I saw Will Smith and Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's a no-brainer. Those are like my two favorite guys. And for the most part, it was awesome quotes and whatnot, but there was actually one quote towards the end by neither of them, but the gentleman said, "The biggest challenges and problems we face will never be solved with comfortable conversations." And that's kind of the crux of this podcast, is that I want to talk about the things that may make people uncomfortable, but need to be discussed and just, fleshed out and explored and hopefully solved, because that's why I love doing these podcasts. Is I really want to touch on the topics and the issues that people are kind of shy away from and they're afraid to talk about. And when everyone else flees away, and I approach it with vigor and passion. So for the book this week that I read, it's called The Gogh Blues, The Creative Person's Path Through Depression by Eric Maisel. And it basically looks at how creatives deal with depression. Most creatives go through a sort of depression that is really a search for meaning in their work and ultimately in their life. And the creatives they don't necessarily have the quote unquote clinical depression. It's kind of a depression that's really what creatives go through. And I think it's kind of controversial, because I was talking to one of my psychiatrist friends, and this kind of distinction between creative depression and clinical is a fine line. And so hopefully in the future I will have on my psychiatrist friends and we will get into this deeper. But it turns out that I thought this book was going to be kind of fluffy, all right? Because I take depression seriously too. I know that antidepressants are very important for treating depression, and I don't want to discount that. But I'm going to go into Maisel's, basically his theories on how he believes that depression can be treated with creatives that don't require necessarily antidepressants, and how he does it with his own patients, his own clients. He has a PhD in counseling psychology, a master's in counseling, undergrad degrees in psychology and philosophy. He's a nationally certified counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist. He has a practice where he treats creatives. He calls himself a creativity coach. But he comes with lots and lots of accolades and experience. So what this guy had to say in his book was pretty awesome to me, and eye-opening and hopeful, in that there's possibly another avenue to treat depression that doesn't require pharmaceuticals and or psychotherapy. So he talks about how it's a cliche that creativity and depression go hand in hand. And from my experience, a lot of my musician friends and artists and writers and actors experience depression, that they're not succeeding at their craft. They have writer's block. They're, worried about what people are going to think about their art. A variety of different maladies, if you will. And so he says that creators are not necessarily afflicted with some biological or psychological disease. They experience depression simply because they're caught up in a struggle to make life seem meaningful to them. And it's this lack of meaning, this search for meaning, that causes the depression. And as I was reading this, I was still pretty skeptical. It sounded like he was discounting depression in a way, but I kept reading because I was going to finish this book and either slam it or say this was a great book because it has got a lot of valid points and actions that one can take. And I ended up taking the latter because for one, like I said, he treats a lot of people, and I understand that the sample size isn't exactly large, but he says he's seen serious depression lift after one creativity coaching session. Over the course of 20 years of counseling and coaching creative clients, he's witnessed this recovery happen time and again. Simply by glimpsing the territory she must traverse, she regains hope, a renewed sense of purpose, and a clearer picture of what steps she must take in her creative life. Nor do these gains last for only a day or a week. I've heard from clients a year or two after a single session that something important happened that had not faded away. Yeah, I was still kind of skeptical at this point, even though I've watched a lot of Tony Robbins, and I've actually been to one of his speakings, which was game changing. I know that's cliche to say, but it literally changed my life. Like there's Alex before and Alex after, and yeah. But what was something that Tony Robbins does is that you just you look on YouTube, it'll be like, you know, Tony Robbins cures depression in 20 minutes or something, and you know, so many people in the comments are like trashing him and stuff. But I'm not going to go into whether that actually happens for Tony Robbins and the people he has at his events. But if there is evidence that depression in a creative can be lifted, can be somewhat cured in one session, I'm interested, and not only to see, you know, what happens, but be able to provide that for other creatives. I thought one passage that was really cool towards the beginning of the book is that he says, "I think depression is a form of wealth. I believe having access to our own emotions is a gift that some folks lose at an early age, and others medicate away with a variety of distractions. I've observed many people who appear to fake their way through adult life with forced smiles and feigned happiness. My radar says they're faking it so that they can keep looking strong and powerful, in control, invulnerable to grief and sadness. I always wonder if they take off their smile when they go behind private doors, since the cheer often appears to be put on like a nice suit." I read this and my first thought was Instagram, and how so many people are putting these pictures up that are, maybe they're doctored, maybe they're not, but people are kind of putting their best face forward, if you will. And everyone looks so happy and so proud and so, you know, like successful. But a lot of people behind these pictures, behind these posts, are really not happy with themselves. That's my opinion, but I don't think I'm wrong, because there are a lot of people that are faking and putting on these fake kind of profiles and identities on social media, but behind closed doors, I don't think they're happy. I think they're insecure, and that they're trying to put a false veneer of themselves. And that's probably a topic I'm going to go into further in another episode, is social media and how it's causing depression and mental health issues. He kind of goes deeper on that and says how as babies, we learn to put on a happy face to please those who feed us, tickle our chin, and touch us when we look cute and happy. He says, "I freely admit that I would walk toward a happy baby or adult faster than one who's screaming. And so the socialization begins." This is an interesting model. He's saying that we are socialized to put on a happy face at all times from the moment we are born. He says, "Be easy, be happy, or be rejected. Don't let others know how you see things or how you feel if it jeopardizes your crumbs of security. Some would rather give up expression than risk being or feeling alone." And that's how he brings it full circle, because he says, and perhaps that is the crux of this paradoxical life. We embrace a life of solitude in order to embrace our creativity. We live outside the mainstream of life and struggle endlessly to survive, both emotionally and financially. And we wonder why we do this thing that causes so much pain and so also joy. This is something I constantly think about and kind of talk about, is that the life of a creative is solitary. Whether we like it or not, for the most part, we are by ourselves. And this can be a tough thing to work with as a creative, is that, especially with social media today, everybody wants to feel connected. We've never been so connected in our lives, yet also at the same time so disconnected. it's, as creatives, we are distracted even more because we always need to feel connected. And the moment that we're not getting any indicators on our phones for a while, or we're not checking our phones, we feel alone. We feel disconnected. And I feel like this is going to get worse and worse. And I can see it in some of my friends, some of my acquaintances, is that if you don't check your phone after a while, you start to feel a little anxious, a little like lonely. And I feel like as a creative, we already feel a solitary life, and that this combination of being creative and also the rise of social media is going to be very bad. So these are all topics that I'm going to continue to explore down the line. So he says that this search for meaning as a creative, it's not something that we're necessarily conscious of. He says, just as you can't sense the fact that billions of neutrinos are passing through your body as you read this passage, most people can't sense that they are engaged in a never-ending interplay with meaning. And another thing that stuck out at me, he said that every second is either supporting or endangering the meaning that you as a creative intend to make. That kind of, to me, is like you're either growing or you're dying, you know? But this is kind of more specifically for us creatives, is that everything you're doing is either supporting your art or endangering it. And that's kind of overwhelming to think about, but I think it's true. As an artist, you want to be surrounded by inspiration, right? By like-minded individuals. That's why everyone moves to LA. And so every moment should be used wisely, and it should be put towards growing as an artist, because that's what we are. That's what we want to do. That's our purpose, if you will, right? So every moment is either fulfilling that purpose or squandering it. So I really like this book because it offers actionable things to take as a reader, because this is what he does. He coaches clients to, get out of this depression they're experiencing and find meaning, rediscover or discover the meaning in their work. And so he says you should ask yourself core questions like these, and I recommend that you write some of these down. He says, ask yourself, how can I force life to have meaning? How can I make life feel meaningful to me? How can I justify my life? What is the center of a creed I might live by? On what operating principles can I base a meaningful life? What is my truth? He asks the reader to engage in self-reflection. And this is super important. Ever since I started meditating and writing in a journal, one page every day, it changed my life in a very positive way. I've been doing it for the last 3 years on and off, and a lot more almost every day the last couple months. But he says specifically, ask yourself a single large question about the meaning of your life. What you want to stand for, what you want to embody, what you want your life to mean. Discard the easy answers, the ones supplied by your ego, your culture, your parents, your mythology. Discard incomplete answers like I just need to make music and all I need to do is write. The answer you're searching for embodies your principles and your goals and is burning red hot just beneath the surface of consciousness, like lava beneath the earth's crust. I love that metaphor because that's what writing in a journal every day does for me. It's a stream of consciousness. And a lot of the stuff you'll write initially, it's just going to be like, well, this is nonsense. But you do it day after day after day, and you're going to start really breaking through that crust, if you will, and getting to the lava, which would be the heart of what's going on in your head, really. And you learn a lot about yourself because you start to realize with the combination of journaling and meditating, preferably one after the other, you start to realize that, holy shit, there's a lot of thoughts going on in my head. Like you almost feel like you're neurotic in a way, because you're like, geez, like I can't shut up. Like if you try to meditate, I'm sure, quite a few of you do, but you'll realize that it's really hard to just sit there and shut off your head, shut off the inner voice. A lot of getting over this depression is self-talk, and positive self-talk, and that's easier said than done. And he goes into cognitive psychology to present a model for dealing with this problem of negative self-talk. He says you begin by eavesdropping on yourself and really listening to what you're saying. This is thought identification. If you don't like what you're saying, you exclaim something like, "I don't want this damn thought." This is thought confrontation. You banish the negative thought and replace it with a positive, friendlier thought. This is thought substitution. If you master this 3-step program, you will have done a tremendous amount to improve your mental health and relieve your depression. This is huge right here. So I'm going to kind of number it for you. The first thing you do is you identify the thought identification. Second, you confront the thought confrontation. And third, you substitute the thought substitution. And if you can get in the habit of doing those 3 steps, whenever you're feeling negative thoughts come on, negative feelings, I feel like this is going to really, really help you. And a researcher looked at ways to treat writer's block, creative block. When I posted on Facebook what were the topics that you guys want me to talk about, creative block was one of the most popular. And this form of cognitive therapy is a good way to attack that creative block, because I feel like a lot of creative block is doubt, negative emotions, negative thoughts, like I can't do this, or procrastination, like I can't, I'm just not in the mood. That's all negative thoughts that can be treated with this 3-step process. So for this clinical psychologist, his method was basically the same, is to focus on identifying what clients were saying to themselves, bring the client's language into awareness, note which self-statements were distracting or counterproductive, and build a treatment plan to counter the writer's negative self-talk. So I can't stress that enough, that if you can fix your negative self-talk and know when it's happening and change it immediately, it's going to be really, really good for you guys. And I thought this was powerful by Dr. Maisel. He said, by getting a grip on your mind, we actually change what we think and what we feel. This is really, really important to comprehend, guys, is that when we can control our thoughts, we can determine what we think and also what we feel. And I read a book actually about 2 months ago called Letting Go. And that book, all of your thoughts are determined by your feelings, right? Every negative thought, or every thought in general, is the result of a feeling of like shame or fear, are generally the two. And so if you can pinpoint that and be conscious of that feeling, you can begin to treat that feeling and realize that this massive, awful, terrible thought you're having is really just based on your fear, or, shame, really fear. So basically what I'm going to get, my point is that the model that Dr. Maisel says is that thoughts determine feelings, and letting go, the book Letting Go says feelings determine thoughts. And I believe that it goes, it means that the A leads to B and also B leads to A. I mean, basically he says you are what you think, right? So you should train yourself to hear what you are saying. Train yourself to confront your negative thoughts and to replace them with self-friendlier ones. Train yourself to look behind your words to discover what you actually mean. And it just sounds so basic, so easy. Like, oh, that's all it takes. But it's powerful. It's really, really, really powerful if you're conscious of your thoughts and you're converting negative into positive thoughts. Just be consistent and conscious of that. Like, because I think that where the difficulty lies is that we have our own lives, right? We can't always be thinking about what we're thinking. We have to do shit, right? Like, we got to drive to work and, like do all the stuff that we can't be like thinking about what the self-talk in our head is at the same time. But I think that there are moments in the day where you can kind of take a moment and like you're not always on the go, like, you know, constantly. If you're feeling negative, you know, take a minute, just stop, take a deep breath, and kind of dictate to yourself, what am I saying to myself that's negative? What are the thoughts? What's the thought in my head that's negative? And try to be really conscious of that quickly and turn it into a positive thought. And as I'm saying that, it sounds so kind of fluff, but I've been trying it lately, and it's actually been working really well, and actually kind of freaked me out because I'm like, damn, like sometimes I'm not like a hater, but sometimes I hate going back to Instagram, but I'm kind of cynical of Instagram. And I told you why, is because it's a lot of fake on there. But that's negative thought. That's negative talk, you know? I'll be like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, but it's not good to think like that. You just don't, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, instead of having a negative thought about someone, just don't have that thought and just move on with your life, right? You don't have to necessarily be like, put on a happy face, you know, like, I don't like that. That's corny. Like, you should not force yourself to be, happy if you're not necessarily like happy at the time. By eliminating negative thoughts, you don't have to necessarily pretend to be happy. You can just not be negative, right? And just go on with your life and do what you do. I think that's a way that I would analyze this in my way, is that, and I think that's what Dr. Maisel would agree with. I don't know, maybe I should have him on sometime, but you should never force yourself to be happy. I mean, he says, without a genuine passion for life, which only comes with self-understanding, your decision to matter will remain a strictly intellectual one. I think this is where he brings it full circle, and where I can stop struggling at this, is that as creatives, you reach that happiness, that genuine passion for life, right? Through your art. As a creative myself, and I think as all creatives out there would understand, is that our art makes us the most happy. Outside of family, I would say that, yeah, our art is what brings us true joy and passion for life. And so I think that by focusing on the meaning you get from your art, that's where you can channel this happiness and not necessarily just put on a fake happy face. And he says that there's a lot of negative outcomes that can result if you aren't coming from a place of meaning. Let's say you want to create a song. You say, I want to write this song. Waves of anxiety are going to rise to keep you out of harm's way. The net result is that you don't write the song because you don't attach any meaning to it. I really believe that a way to get out of a creative funk is to think about why you were doing your art. What's the basis behind it, right? Like, what's the meaning behind it? And if you don't have this meaning for whatever you're doing, depression results.